So welcome to the panel, Empowering Refugee Education for Climate Resilience. Thank you to Dubai Cares, to RewirEd organizers, and to the UNHCR for including this discussion in this packed agenda today. And thank you too to the panelists for taking time today to be part of this. And I'll introduce the panelists shortly. So my name is Rebecca Granato, and I work for the Open Society University Network and Bard College. And as a network, we're deeply committed to supporting refugee populations, particularly when it comes to accessing education, since we're a higher education network. In my role, I oversee what are called the Hubs for Connected Learning initiatives, which educate refugee youth researchers and potential university students with an overarching goal of preparing them to really grapple with the challenges of today's world. And of course, that includes the pronounced impact that climate change is going to have on their futures. So this is a particularly timely moment for this panel. First, we have crossed 110 million displaced persons in the world. About 30.5 of them are refugees, and the others are other displaced persons, the other 70 million. Second, we are coming up upon the Global Refugee Forum next week. And this will bring together in Geneva heads of states, other government ministers, other key stakeholders who are working in different areas related to refugee populations to really take stock of the progress that's been made globally in improving the lives of refugees and ensuring their protection. So it's also a time for high-level actors to make firm commitments to supporting the objectives set out in the Global Compact on Refugees, including easing pressure on host countries, enhancing refugee self-reliance, increasing access to third country solutions, and improving the situations in refugees' countries of origins. So key to actualizing the compact at this very moment is also taking into account the impact that climate change is having on refugees and the impact that refugees can have on coming up with solutions to mitigate the impact of climate change on their own communities. As many of you might be aware, 75% of refugees are living in developing countries and in areas where climate change is having a disproportionate impact on communities. So just to give two concrete examples from work that I do, one is in Kenya, where there's been a very prolonged and severe drought, followed by, for many years, followed by now intensive rains, incredibly disruptive. A very different example, but also similar in terms of climate-induced severe impacts, is Bangladesh, the Rohingya camps, which are the largest refugee camps in the world, where there's been climate-induced monsoons and cyclones that are unseasonable and extreme heat patterns. So when we're dealing with these kinds of climate-induced extreme weather patterns, what happens in effect is it exacerbates the challenges that refugees are facing, affecting their safety, their well-being, and also their access to education. So UNHCR and their partners, many of whom are sitting here today, are deeply committed to reducing this impact through climate-aware education for refugee youth, aiming to empower them as positive change agents in their own right. And in this urgent moment, refugee youth must be equipped with the skills for their own solutions, for designing their own solutions, including navigating the very sensitive relationships with their host governments. So this session is going to address the role of education in helping refugees adapt to and mitigate the significant effects of climate change, with a focus on the role of financing, technology, and youth engagement in this process. So each of our distinguished panelists brings a very different perspective to this discussion, but all of them share a common cause in supporting refugees to be able to adapt to and mitigate climate change effects. So I will introduce us in order, actually, from left to right. Okay. So we have Rana Turk, Business Development and Growth Director from Luminus Life Plus. We have Nhial Deng, Consultant and Coordinator with the Refugee Education Council of World Vision. We have Raakhi Williams. You guys are out of order on my paper. Raakhi Williams, Chief of Strategy, Planning, and Accountability at Education Cannot Wait. And we have Danah Dajani, Senior Vice President, Partnerships and Programs at the Abdullah Al Ghurair Foundation for Education. So thank you all for taking the time. So we're going to start with a general question for all of you. And I think we'll go in the opposite direction. We'll start with Danah, then we'll go to Raakhi. We'll go in order just to make it simple. So the question is, what is your organization doing to support refugees to adapt to and mitigate climate change effects? So Danah, over to you.
Well, apologies first for being late. Running in this place, and it's not my forte. But thank you for that. So I'm representing the Abdulaziz Al Ghurair Refugee Education Fund. What we've done, Rebecca, is if I go back in time a bit, pre-launch of the fund, we worked very closely with UNHCR on designing what can a philanthropy or a philanthropist do to be able to identify the gaps for refugee education. What is it that we can do that really can add value? And I say that because it's very important for us to not just stop there. We constantly do that. So when you think about green, you think about sustainability, you think about all the upskilling, these are all opportunities that for vulnerable people, it becomes almost double the need, if not triple the need. So for us, what we did was we looked at education as a vehicle. We didn't look at green or sustainability or digital or other kinds of skills that are on separate grounds. We tried to look at it as though it's a capsule, whether it's sustainability is at the core. It's not just about helping them get a livelihood. It's also about how can we help them cope in the future? How can we help them transfer that knowledge to their families who are at risk of being potentially climate refugees? They're going to be the ones that are safeguarding our future. On the other hand, what are the kinds of skills that we need, or the private sector needs, that we can invest in specializing, helping them specialize in these skills? So we've done that. We started off with, I'll talk about the upskilling. We have one of our partners, Luminus. Through Luminus, we're able to do automotive technology, helping young people to be able to fix electrical cars, as an example. In Jordan, when the government promoted the idea of using electrical cars, they didn't have enough electricians to be able to fix the electric cars. So this was a huge potential. And so the certification was accredited by the Ministry of Higher Education, as well as recognized by Bosch in Germany. We also partnered with the Al Hussein Technical University, where people were trained on solar panels, on PVC panels, on energy efficiency, renewable energy. But what was important there was the private sector took a leading role. So SMA, they provided the equipment that was, the latest technology and equipment. So when these young people, and I'm talking about very vulnerable young people and refugees, were able to use these kinds of equipment, when they go to start work, it gives them firstly a comparative advantage, but as well, it doesn't give them that surprise of, I don't know what this is. I didn't learn about it in my theory. Very much practical. So the stakeholders, whether they are sort of private sector, NGOs, UNHCR and the UN bodies, other educational institutions, educators, young people themselves, they're all part of the process. But not only part of getting the jobs or giving the education. We need to work together, and this is what's been successful.
On to Raakhi.
Thank you. So I think for Education Cannot Wait, one of the things we do is try to raise global awareness, a real call to action. And you talked about some of the numbers, Rebecca, but we produce global estimates every year. So thinking about education, 224 million crisis-affected children and adolescents right now are in need of urgent educational assistance. So we're talking about the size of Brazil, more or less, or the size of Pakistan, that kind of scale. And ahead of COP, we produced a new estimate that found that a third of those children are out of education as a result of climate shocks. And additionally, 13 million have been displaced as a result of climate shocks. And what do we know about displacement? For internal displacement, a primary school age child who is displaced is twice as likely to be out of school than a primary a primary age school who, who's they're one of their peers who's non-displaced. So really it's a crisis in achieving SDG 4, which is about access to education and access to quality education. So for us, there's a real sense of doing work that's about raising the call to action, raising global awareness on this crisis. I think additionally, Education Cannot Wait does programming. So when a climate shock happens, we act with what we call the fierce urgency of now. In the words of, it was, Gordon Brown, our UN Special Envoy, often uses them. And there, I can think of an example of Chad, for example, where there was, in Cameroon, you had water, resource management, issues, and actually as a result there was tension between fishermen, farmers and herders, and that caused hundreds of thousands to be displaced into Chad, including children. And there we worked with our partner UNHCR to provide continuity of education, disaster resilient classrooms, and improved water and sanitation, improved latrines, which we know is particularly important to ensure that girls keep in school. So that's an example of our programming. Another area is that we really try to work with communities to anticipate and act ahead of a climate shock. So there we're talking about disaster risk reduction. And I can think of an example in South Sudan where we did safety audits that were actually carried out by parents and teachers working in tandem, looking at the school, looking at how you can think about building a resilient school against climate shocks, against conflict. And as a result, there were school safety plans that were instrumented. And actually, what was interesting in that case is that there was a survey at the end, and the school children themselves, 90% of them, said that as a result, they felt safe or very safe as a result of the changes. And then the last area I'd just like to touch on in our work is youth participation and empowerment. And you spoke about the Rohingya earlier. And one example there, which I think is particularly nice, is that in Cox's Bazar, again through HCR, we are funding youth environment clubs. So young people are working in community and they're planting trees, they're thinking about waste management, they're thinking about pollution within the camp. And I think examples like that are especially positive because I think we're talking about groups who also, as we know, are very likely to suffer a lot of trauma. And psychosocial services are particularly important. And I think, taking agency in this way through environmental clubs, for example, is one way in which young people can actually come from a really tough situation and take agency within their community and take action on climate change.
Thank you. Nhial.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good to be with you all. My name is Nhial Deng. I will talk. It's a difficult question for me because I do not represent an organization here. I'm just on my own as an activist. But I'll talk a bit about my community work in Kakuma Refugee Camp, and then I'll talk briefly about what the Refugee Education Council is because I think the work they do is important. So I grew up in a refugee camp called Kakuma Refugee Camp. It's a big refugee camp with about 260,000 refugees from all across East Africa, mostly from South Sudan, DRC, Ethiopia, Somalia, countries that have been devastated by conflict for a long time. And I started my community work in the refugee camp when I was in high school. I set up a youth group. It started as a very informal gathering of young people where we just used to come together every Wednesdays and talk about ways we can find solutions to challenges in our communities. We started running mentorship programming and leadership programming, and later it grew into a big movement of young people in the refugee camp. We had thousands and thousands of young people participating in workshops, in training program, in game and sport activities, and it became a hub that empowered young people to not just dream big again, because one thing that happened when you have to flee conflict is that the trauma, make it very difficult for you to even integrate in school again and have that, opportunity to thrive. So it was a space where young people were able to come together and heal from their trauma, as well as have hope again, and try to find solutions to challenges in their communities. Which I think is very, very crucial, because oftentimes when I talk about refugees, it doesn't really, the first thing that comes to our mind is what international organization does for refugees, which I think is very, very important. But we often do not talk a lot about what refugees does in their own community to find solutions to challenges facing them. And what I saw from my community work in Kakuma Refugee Camp is that whenever refugees face challenges, they're the first on the front line trying to find solutions with the very limited resources they have. The second observation was that every single time when we have gathering, there will be very few young women and girls showing up. So I realized that there were a lot of structural barriers facing young women and girls from, participating in leadership and education opportunities in the refugee camps. So in 2021, I set up She Leads Kakuma, which is a leadership and mentorship program for young women in the refugee camp. We put them through empowerment programming, as well as connect them with mentors all around the world that, put them on a 6-month virtual mentorship, personalized journey. And that also raised an alarm that oftentimes we talk about refugees as one big homogeneous group. They are not. The challenges that refugees face are unique. The challenges that young women and girls face in refugee context and boys are not the same. The elders as well as other group of refugees, those living with disability. There are a lot of accessibility issues, in education and other facilities in the refugee camp. So that is where my work focused. So 3 years ago, I got a full scholarship to move to Canada, where I'm currently studying. I'm doing my undergraduate studies, pursuing global studies in digital communication, but I'm still very much involved in the work back in the refugee camp. I had an opportunity to travel back to East Africa this summer, where I visited 5 refugee camps in the region. And the context in each refugee camp is completely different, which again raised an alarm that we need to localize solution around refugees because the context are different. And then coming to the Refugee Education Council. So the Refugee Education Council, which I've had the honor to lead over the last 1 year, is an advisory group that advised the government of Canada on refugee education. And it's very, very, powerful body that highlight that we cannot really, design solution about refugees without refugees at the table, which doesn't happen a lot. And a lot of my work over the last, 2-3 years has been, working with government within the UN system to change how we do our work. And I believe that when we put refugees at the forefront, we're more able to design solutions that are effective and solutions that respond to the challenges well, because there can never be better expert on refugees than refugees. So the Refugee Education Council has been doing a lot of amazing work over the last 3 years in advising Canada on their Together for Learning campaign, which is a 3-year international campaign to advance education to refugees. They released a youth manifesto in 2022, a call to action to global leaders to address the global education crisis, highlighting 5 themes in education that need a key focus: inclusion, gender equality, digital learning, mental health and psychosocial support, and the last one is accountability, which I think is very important. We need to be accountable. There's a lot of talking happening everywhere. I've been to over 20 conferences over the last, I think 1 year, and this just talk, 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 talk. It can't continue that way. We need action.
Thank you, Nhial. Rana.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much. I want to actually extend my thanks to RewirEd and to the different partners from UNHCR and Abdelaziz Ghurair Foundation, collaborating together, serving learners and refugees in Jordan. Just to give you an idea, what is Luminus Life Plus? We've started as a technical vocational college 22 years back. And as we go interacting with the different private sector, donors, learners, parents, families, challenges that we're facing, whether in Jordan and across the region, we've learned across the board how we're gonna move forward building a comprehensive educational employment approach, serving our learners, our youth, our refugees. And you know that Jordan, it's one of the biggest countries hosting refugees in the Middle East. And I'm a refugee from Palestine, and I've lived in Jordan a very decent, good life, and I've received the best education. And now I'm very glad to work with Luminus Life Plus, which is a comprehensive, holistic model that we extend our services beyond education. It's a long life learning journey that we're creating and presenting to all our learners. And again, when we say beyond education, what does it mean? We're trying really to provide our learners with 3 key services, starting from high education, where we're partnering with international educational developers, and we're really providing short courses, diploma courses, BA courses and programs to learners and refugees. And I want to say that, Luminus Life Plus now, we provide a first opportunity and a second opportunity for the youth who couldn't really pass their high school. And we've been well known that, we're receiving vulnerable youth and refugees from all over governorates in Jordan, and we're having 12 governorates. We're trying to make it an accessible hub for them. The second service, and I'm so proud really to announce it, that we've started providing financing for education, innovative financing for our learners to make it accessible for everyone. So families, they will not feel the burden of engaging their youth, even if they cannot really pay the fees and the tuition. So we're making it accessible by allowing them to pay for the education even after 2 years of finishing their programs. The third service, it's the employment, and we're having the biggest employment hub within our campus, where we succeeded last year to employ 4,700 learners, of course in close collaboration with our partners. Since 2015, we've started working with the different donors. We've worked with 33 donors, and we've served 7,000 refugees. We've managed really to serve 150,000 learners, among them 26,000 refugees. And again, what we're doing, it's education for employment. So we're obliged really to find decent jobs for all our learners and refugees. And we've done this through our 11 schools, where really we consider one of the top technical vocational college university in Jordan, and hopefully in the region, because we're starting soon in Iraq. So we have the hospitality, the automotive, the business school, the advanced computing, sponsored of course by Abdulaziz Ghurair Foundation, and we're having the art school, and among all our schools we're trying really to embed two elements that we're focusing now, embedding, enforcing all our learners to focus on their well-being. So it's a mandatory engagement from their side to participate in sport actions and in learning about nutrition, and we're linking this with incentive schemes for all of them, measuring their advancement and the well-being, and we're introducing a mental health support for all of them, having coaches to be with them since they've starting with us in their journey, and even it's a long life journey, so we're providing skilling, upskilling for all of them. We're tackling now all target groups. It's not just students. We're focusing to reach women in their house, and providing entrepreneurship, as we have our North Campus. It's a Fab Lab, and it's one of the biggest accelerators in Jordan. We're helping home-based businesses and self-employment, learners. And, we're committed actually to hire 25,000 learner in Jordan, and 250 hopefully a citizen across the region and globally, and we're succeeding. And alhamdulillah, we have now 7,500 employers working with us directly, coordinating with them how we're going to update the curricula, how we're going to respond to them, and finding immediate jobs for our learners. Glad to be with you.
Thank you. So I think we've heard very different approaches and responses to how we can support refugees in developing the skills they need to be able to mitigate these impacts that climate change is having on their lives and will have in the future. So let's think a little bit about technology and how technology can support skills development in youth for climate change adaptation. And I know in the program that I run, one thing that I see is that connectivity is really critical, not only for access to information, but also so that there can be student engagement across borders and across very different contexts, so students can learn from each other. So Nhial, I want to ask you, from your professional and personal experiences, what is the role that technology and education plays in responding to climate change?
Thank you so much. Before I talk a bit about that, I'll just mention briefly, I think many people already know, but while I was in New York for the UN General Assembly holiday this year in September, I had the honor of receiving the Global Student Prize. It's a $100,000 award given to one student who had made a difference in their community, and a big, a portion of that money is going back to Kakuma refugee camp to build a library and a community center for young people. And that center is basically going to use technology to connect Kakuma to the world and to connect the world to Kakuma. It will bring in education opportunities, it will bring in job opportunities, it will bring in entrepreneurship opportunities for young people. And personally, in my own education journey, as I mentioned, I did all my schooling in the refugee camp. Something you will see for those of you about opportunities to be in a refugee camp is that, schools are very, very under-resourced. Not enough teachers, not enough textbooks, not enough laboratories for those, who do sciences. And technology can, bring in a huge role. I had the opportunity to benefit from a program run by the Vodafone Foundation and UNHCR when I was in high school. The Instant Network School, which connect schools in refugee camp with internet connectivity and provide tablets to kids as well as computers to teachers to help them have access to resources, that could help them deliver quality education to their sibling. And I always tell people that technology basically made it possible for me to be here today, because I remember when I finished high school in Kakuma refugee camp, I did not have an opportunity to go to college right away. Access to tertiary education is very, very limited for refugees. I think the numbers right now is at 7%. There's still a lot that needs to be done. UNHCR is doing an amazing work, with the campaign 50 by 30, trying to make sure that the number of refugee students enrolled in tertiary education by 2030 is 15%. But basically, when I finished high school, I did not have an opportunity to go to college. So I applied for a free scholarship program, nothing worked. I was like, okay, it's either I give up or I try to utilize the very limited resources I have. So the first resources I used was actually my phone. So I used my phone to connect to the internet. I went to Vodafone Instant Network Digital Hub in the refugee camp, took courses online on Coursera and EDX. I learned about everything I want to know about, from the work of the UN, to international organization, to human rights, to peace building. And that knowledge went back to building the community work I was doing in Kakuma refugee camp. But it also exposed me to the world. So after, spending so much time learning about different programs, I started applying for colleges, and that is actually how I found myself in Canada. So I did all my application for college in the refugee camp. No college counselor. My college counselor with my telephone and the tablet I had. It was a very interesting experience. So the first time I applied was actually to US because I wanted to go to US colleges, and I applied to Berkeley, which was my dream school, and I got in. And I remember, when I received the news, I was sending it to all my friends celebrating. And then because I did not know anything about how college application process works, so a few days later, a friend messaged me and told me, hey, you need to check your financial aid package. I was like, what is it? They advised me, log into your portal, you'll see how much money they're giving you. And I logged in and I saw estimated cost of attendance for 1 year for the program I wanted to do, including, accommodation, everything was 69,000 US dollars. Funding offered zero. I was like, they read my essays. Where am I getting this much money? So I reached out to them, and they later went through my case, and they gave me a partial scholarship, 25K, not enough. I can't get 40, but then I took that experience and started applying to other colleges and actually reading about what are the opportunities there, and I ended up getting a full scholarship to go to Canada. So that just shows you how technology can be very transformative in opening those doors. One, in being able to open access to education. I think you mentioned a bit about the work that OSUN does. Different program. I mentioned about INS. JWR also run a similar program where they offer refugees the opportunity to go to study, online and get, diplomas as well as degree from American colleges. So it helped a lot in, I think, bridging that gap first. That is, access to education. I think the second aspect is access to job opportunities. So this is also a very, very big challenge for refugees. And I think it's very important, especially when you think about that, aspect about being able to become self-reliant and independent. So technology can help a lot in, bridging that gap, through online job. The first job that I actually did, my first professional job was for a UK charity, and I did that from Kakuma refugee camp as a communication person, working just through a computer and internet connectivity. And there's been a lot of programs that has tried to use technology to bridge that gap. So I think it could help a lot in those two ways. And I think the other part, which I just want to highlight briefly before I close, is that I think for those to happen, there's need for a lot of actors to come, on board. I always tell people that when I was growing up, I used to listen to the radio with my dad, and I would ask him, why is this going wrong? Why is there conflict? And he would tell me it's politician. So I don't used to like politicians, and I feel like they were messing up the world. And then I was like, okay, so the UN is actually the whole organization building a better world. But I don't think it should be the UN. I think everyone needs to come on board. We need businesses on board. We need government on board. We need universities on board. We need foundations on board. Everyone has a role to play. When you look at this thing that I just talked about, from access to education to job opportunities, we need policies that will make it happen. For example, in Kenya, refugees do not have the right to work. So you can earn a degree, but you can't work. So we need policies that will make that happen. So I think everyone, including all of us in this room, has a key role to play. So we need to look at what can I do to be able to help us, get into the vision, the 2030 agenda for sustainable development.
And you've raised a good point there, Nhial, which goes directly to our next question in terms of the need for multiple actors to be working in this space when we're thinking about mitigating the challenges that climate change presents to youth. So, Danah, we're going to turn to you. What role do you think educators in the private sector play in equipping refugees with the necessary skills to undergo this process of adaptation?
So I'd like to build on what Nhial had just said. We're all stakeholders. We're all really important actors. So the private sector, like I said before, is that we don't look at them as though they're the ones that will, to provide the job opportunity. And this is what's been happening sort of historically. The NGOs would go to the private sector, give us some money from your CSR, and then, have a nice photo, and that's it. But they have a shared responsibility. And, with refugees, as was mentioned by my fellow panelists as well, they're not allowed to work even in Jordan. They're not allowed to work in Lebanon. Their employment is getting more and more restricted. And I don't blame the host countries. With Lebanon's increased unemployment and increased crisis that's happening, same with Jordan with increased poverty and increased unemployment, we need to find ways and be very sort of more creative and innovative in finding ways to provide not just the access, but like Nhial had said, the exposure is very important. The private sector is not just about, our chairman has been to Jordan and visited with our young people several times. He says engagement is more important and actually would take more time than signing the check. It's not about the money that we want from the private sector. What we really need is, just because they're refugees doesn't mean they're not entitled to the same skills that other young people are entitled to, and to the same opportunities, etc. So what we try to do is we get the private sector on board, we get all the players on board, but it's right from designing. How do we design the skills that are needed for these young people? When we talk about employment opportunities, we're not talking about full-time employment. It could be, it's successful career outcomes, right from, it could be full-time. That's great. It could be part-time, remote. As the world has become much smaller and interconnected after COVID, we have seen young people, and I'll give you an example of one young person in Lebanon, a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, who took a software programming course and is now working remotely in Paris. This young Palestinian would not be able to get a visa and go to Paris, but is able to work and get a decent job, decent experience, and a decent salary, and he's now taking care of his family. We have numerous stories like this where they're building their portfolio. So I think it's very right of saying that we still also need a conducive environment where we come together and we look at the policies, and not just for trendy topics. And like I said before, when we look at green, when we look at gender, sustainability, inclusivity, these are all interconnected within all our programs. We don't look at them as separate. When we look at, the secondary education, and I like what Education Cannot Wait, of course, working in that sector as well, is that we provided awareness, because exposure is so important for these vulnerable young people, and we sometimes take that knowledge and take the network or take the person sitting next to us that we can speak to for granted. So I think these are things that we keep thinking about as we're talking to the young people as well.
Thank you, Danah. And, we're still thinking about this integrated approach when we're thinking about adaptations to climate change for these youth. Rana, what would you like to add to that same question about the skills that are necessary and the role of the private sector?
I will start actually by emphasizing the fact that we're teaching by being an example at our campus. We're having the biggest solar panels in our both campuses, and really we're allowing the learners to see it in their eyes, yani, that we're covering and the consumption of our electricity ourselves almost 100%, and even we're contributing to the government grid of it. The other thing that through our hospitality school, the automotive, we've partnered with the Circular Lab Academy, and really we're embedding certain practices for the waste management, for the water and energy saving, allowing our learners to learn it by doing it, interacting directly with the different private sectors from the industry, whether with the automotive companies, with the hotels, with the different restaurants, trying to allow our learners to come up with new ideas of new businesses, allowing them to, even through their assignments, to come up with solutions that will respond to climate change. I want to emphasize another thing. In the rural areas, in our north campus, we're working in 4 governorates, and we're working heavily with refugees, women refugees there, and we're focusing on allowing them really to come up with home-based businesses in the farming and the agri-food. Some of them really they've started already herbal projects and doing a very small value chain projects among themselves with water drip irrigation, producing herbals at a time and different sage, and collecting it and selling it. We're having other refugees as well in Gaza Refugee, which is the biggest refugee camp in the north of Jordan that we're supporting. They've started rooftop farms, and which is great for them. It's small projects, but again, as Danah said, it's hard for them to find a full-time job. So we're trying really to allow them to start their own businesses and to focus heavily on providing them with the entrepreneurship skills that they need. Another thing I want to tell you, that we're starting our eco gym, the biggest eco gym within a campus, that we're going to generate power through the workup of our learners. So this is something new that we're doing it with a German partner. And another thing, we're starting one of the biggest organic farms, introducing a new diploma in the agriculture sector. And of course, we're going to allow our learners to learn how, to get into the food security and agriculture industry. These are some of the current examples, and we're trying really to develop our first sustainable school for sustainable technology in the north, which is, we're going to tackle different aspects responding to climate change. And we're working with Pearson, which is one of our main and major educational developer partners, where we're going to introduce a new qualification for climate change. And this, we're going to allow our learners to dig deeper in the different aspects of how we're going to go green. What are the green jobs? What are the different directions for them to look at transportation, at fashion, at agriculture, at food? So this is something in the pipeline for us to introduce to our learners. And I do want to continue that, whatever we're doing, any new sector we're in, we're immediately partnering with the private sector to secure them with the updated knowledge, updated curricula, and whether to find the part-time jobs or entrepreneurial jobs or a full-time job. Another thing,
and this is another way of kind of integrating and ensuring integration from the beginning.
Yeah.
So we just have a few minutes left, and we want to turn to Raakhi. And I think the question we want to ask you is, what action is Education Cannot Wait planning to take to galvanize broader support in the wake of COP?
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, I mean, one thing that I have been particularly excited about seeing at COP was what happened on day 3, when there was a declaration on climate relief, recovery, and peace, A long title, but in a nutshell, it was the first declaration that was saying for the first time climate and conflict are related, and the world kind of, formally woke up to that fact. And we see it, for example, a family, including children displaced maybe from Somalia as a result of Al-Shabaab, coming into their community, displaced into Kenya, where they might then be vulnerable to drought. And then maybe a cycle, and then maybe a flood event. So, just the interconnectivity of conflict and climate is playing out. And so that's something that's at the forefront of our mind as we go ahead to take forward our actions from COP. And actually what we're doing at COP, we're launching, and we've got QR codes that we can give out, an emergency appeal called Right Here, Right Now. So we're looking to raise 150 million to reach 2 million crisis-affected children and adolescents, children and young people at the front line of the climate crisis, at the front line of climate shocks. And this isn't, a huge amount of money when you compare it to the spending that we were seeing in the climate finance world, or that's going on, military spending. But very sadly, money in this sector is simply not keeping pace with need. Yep. And so at the moment, around 40% of children in crisis situations are missing out on education because the funding is simply not available. And education and child protection are historically always the underfunded sectors. And interestingly, they're also the sectors that deal with children. So children are really missing out, and we have a responsibility to meet their needs. And we'll be absolutely taking that forward after COP. Please spread the word about our appeal. And then just in addition to that financing piece, we've made a number of commitments as an institution. So we will be greening ourselves, thinking about our own emissions. We'll be committed, we've committed to this year to do 2 anticipatory action pilots. So really thinking about how can we act ahead of need in terms of education. And we'll also be thinking about evidence, particularly on subjects like this, at the intersection of displacement and education and climate. And finally, we'll be thinking always about how to make our programming even more climate resilient in a very holistic way. And I think for that, we can look at the Comprehensive School Safety Framework, which is a very helpful guiding tool for our sector that we will continue to champion, and we've formally signed up to now.
Thank you. So I think we've heard quite a bit about, building sustainable models even within our own organizations, and working with other partners to make sure we are modeling the building of sustainable models, and also thinking about integration and inclusivity in the partners that we're including individuals with lived experience. So I think now we're going to turn it over to Frankie Randall, who's sitting in the back there, and he's going to announce the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium pledge for the Global Refugee Forum that maybe all of you will want to join and support.
Okay, so first of all, I found that a really rich and engaging discussion. So I think we should start with a round of applause. Thank you, Rebecca, Rana, Nhial, Raakhi, and Danah. That was great. So as Rebecca mentioned, I'm working for UNHCR, and it was great to hear about the perspective of UNHCR from our partners. I feel like our work always sounds much better when it comes out the mouth, when it's described by our partners rather than by us. So for UNHCR, just by way of introduction, I work on what we call connected education, which other people may refer to as digital or distance learning. Also in higher education. In higher education, as was mentioned, UNHCR is working towards 15% enrollment of refugees in higher education by the year 2030. And a key part of this is through what we call connected higher education, so digital learning. And in connected higher education, we work with a consortium of 42 members, mostly universities. It's co-led by UNHCR and Arizona State University, so led by a UN agency and the world's #1 university for innovation, which I think makes a nice partnership, talking about these kind of cross-sector, multi-stakeholder partnership. I think that's a good example of one. And I wanted to talk about this pledge now very briefly, because I know we're over time, because it touches on 3 issues which we're talking about here today. Connectivity, or technology, let's say, finance, and skills for the green economy. So what UNHCR and the Connected Learning in Crisis Consortium are committing to at the Global Refugee Forum, and I don't have time to explain what that is, So apologies for that, but it's the big event next week.
I explained it.
Oh, thank you. So we'll be committing to working to achieve 15 by 30 through these three things. One, on technology, through making connectivity and offline first technology available in refugee camps so that higher education can take place where refugees are located. We heard the statistic earlier around the vast majority of refugees are in the countries neighboring those that they have fled, which are most often low and middle income countries. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the skills for the green economy. By allowing for higher education to take place where the refugees are hosted, it then opens up the possibilities of cross-border education. And we have within our consortium top-tier universities like University of Oxford, MIT. I mentioned Arizona State Universities, but also working with local universities. Luminus are also a member, we're very proud to say, of our consortium. Yeah. So we can bring in that really high quality of education for the green transition. And finally, on finance, and I think this is something we've been quite excited about, is in higher education, we've been very successful in running campaigns to fund refugee higher education through private donations. Traditionally, higher education in refugee settings has relied a lot on foundations or donor funding. And ultimately, that's not going to be sustainable over, let's say, a 5, 10, 15-year period, which is what we need to see to get to this 15% target. But what we are seeing is a huge outpouring of generosity from small and medium-sized donors, often individuals, who are willing to put their name to sponsor refugees to enter higher education. And so the combination of those three things is going to form part of our pledge on connected higher education at the Global Refugee Forum. We invite those of you who are interested. I wish I had a QR code as well. You'll just have to come and speak to me, I'm afraid, to do it the old-fashioned way for now. To please reach out. Yeah, that's essentially it. And I think we can wrap it up again with a final round of applause. Thank you so much to our lovely panel.